Okay, I have a very useful video for today. It's going to tie together the last three sections very neatly, unit linked and with profit contracts. It's going to cover profit testing and reserving aspects of profit testing. Last video from the teaching part of the contingencies in Actuarial Mathematics series. Okay, then after that, I will go through questions from past papers, much like I'm doing for this one. But except this one, I feel like it's needed to be done in order to cover the work fully so that you can get the theory side, of the practical side of the last three sections. Then the videos that follow this will all be on questions, similar to how I'm doing it now, but except I've already covered the information quite thoroughly, so that will be more regarded as revision or practice for you to see how to answer questions. But this, I'm actually still trying to convey concepts, so it's slightly different. But anyway, let me get to this video. So I have this question here, and as I go, I'm going to explain exactly how everything is working with respect to unit-linked contracts, and I'm going to be setting up a unit fund account, a non-unit fund account. I'm going to be calculating profits, and then I'm going to be zeroizing and calculating profit margins. Okay, so let's read this question, understand what's required of us, and get going. Okay, so a life insurance company issues a 3-year unit-linked endowment assurance contract. Okay, endowment, death benefit, and maturity benefit. Contract to a male life aged 62, under which level annual premiums of £10,000 are payable in advance throughout the term of the policy or until earlier death. Okay, 85% of each year's premium is invested in units at the offer price. So that there is this allocated premiums. Okay, 85% is the allocation percentage. So 15% here is going to the non-unit fund. And then it says also that there is a bid-offer spread in the unit values, with the bid price being 95% of the offer price. In other words, a 5% bid-offer spread. Okay, so what that means then is 85% go here into the allocated premiums, and then 95 of that goes into this cost of allocation and actually gets invested in the unit fund. And the other 5% of the 95 also goes to this bid offer spread, which goes to the non-unit fund. So basically in this non-unit fund, I'll be sitting with 15% plus 5% of 85%. Okay, we'll see how all this works when I actually do all the tabulations. Okay, so then there is an annual management charge of 1.25% of the bid value of units. Management charges are deducted at the end of each year before death or maturity benefits are paid. Okay, so that's here, unit fund charges. Company income, it's going into the non-unit fund, but it comes out of the unit fund. Okay, that's my management charges. Okay, then on the death of the policyholder during the term of the policy, there is a benefit payable at the end of year of death of £20,000 or the bid value of the units allocated to the policy if greater. So in other words, what I'm saying here is if the person dies and the bid value of the units is less than 20,000, they'll get paid 20,000. If they die and the bid value of the units is greater than 20,000, they'll get the bid value of the units, which is that sum that's greater than 20,000. Okay. Then on maturity, 115% of the full bid value of the units is payable. Okay, so what I'm saying here then is 100% of the bid value of units is actually invested. Okay, now I am required to pay them 115%, so extra 15%. And where will that come from? Well, not the bid value of the units, because I'm paying them out everything from the unit fund, 100%. So I actually have to chip in from the non-unit fund, and this is what I was talking about earlier. If there are potential non-unit benefits that need to be paid to the policyholder, this is a prime example of that. We're going to have to pay out of the non-unit fund to subsidize these benefits that the policyholder will be getting, because the 15% here is above and beyond what's sitting in the unit fund. Okay, Then the company holds unit provisions equal to the full bid value of the units. Okay, so that's basically just saying that we have a unit fund. Okay, so we actually are investing this. We're not just tracking an index and keeping everything in our non-unit fund and hoping we outperform the index. That's not what we're saying. We're saying we're actually taking this bid value of the units and actually putting it in the fund that this policyholder wants. Okay, so then it says it sets up non-unit provisions to zeroize any negative non-unit fund cash flows other than those occurring in the first year. Okay, so that's the zeroization from the reserving aspects of profit testing. Okay, so we'll get to all of that. Now, the life insurance company uses the following assumptions in carrying out profit tests of this contract. So it has ultimate mortality, initial and renewal expenses. We'll cover all of this when we're actually tabulating things. Then there's a unit fund growth rate of 8% and a non-unit fund growth rate of 4%. So that's the assumption that we're going to be holding for this profit test. So this unit fund, it grows with the returns of the fund, and we're saying that that's at 8%. And this non-unit fund, it grows with the investments of the insurance company, and we're saying that's 4%. Okay, so then we also have a non-unit fund provision basis. So this is basically saying when I'm zeroizing or setting up non-unit provisions, non-unit reserves, I'm using AM92 ultimate mortality, same as the mortality I was using in the profit test, and then I'm using interest at 4% per annum. So I just have to keep that in mind, okay? And then my risk discount rate, which I'm using to discount my profits so that I can calculate the net present value, that's 15% per annum, okay? And now it says calculate the profit margin on the contract. Okay, so wow, so there's a lot packed in here, and we're going to cover everything and finish this question in the best possible way. So first thing we need is we need to set up a non-unit fund and we need to set up a unit fund. Now, which one should we set up first? Okay, well, let's think about it. If we set up a unit fund first, then, okay, we're going to be getting this cost of allocation in, we'll be paying out benefits, yeah, fine, we know how to do all of this, and then these unit fund charges. Okay, but what's the value of these unit fund charges? Well, let's go look again. It says management charges of 1.25% of the bid value of the units. Okay, so it's going to be 1.25% of what's sitting in here. So in other words, if I set this up first, then I'm going to be having this income, but I actually won't know what the income is, what the value of that income is each year for my management charges. So I need to set up my unit fund first so I know what this management charges are, the value of them. That's going to be an income here and an outflow over here. Okay. So fine, we set up the unit fund first. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, there are two ways that you can go about writing these things. You can tabulate them with all your account names or whatever the cash flow is called here, and then you can have like year 1, year 2, year 3, which is what I'm going to do. Or you could go and you could write something like this: year 1, year 2, year 3, and then you could write all the names over here for the accounts and you tabulate in that direction. Now that, I think, is just a bit less practical, because generally speaking, in a question that you're going to get in the exam, you're going to have fewer years than you'll have account names. And to squash your account names on this horizontal page is a lot more difficult. It's much easier to write them one below the other. You end up with much more space if you set it out like this. So that's how I'm going to set it out, and I encourage you to do the same. You might see memos that are written the other way every now and then, but don't do that. Well, I mean, you can do it if you want, but I wouldn't advise it. Okay, so here's the unit fund, and let's set up this table. Okay, we're not going to fuss too much about making our table look nice. There's year 1, there's year 2, there's year 3. It's very clear what these Y's mean to the marker. We don't have to fuss. Okay, now, this unit fund, at the start of every year, it's going to have a beginning value. So this is the fund at the year start. Okay, so at the beginning of the year, that's the fund value. Now at year 1, the fund value is 0. Okay, I'm starting the year with nothing. Then the fund value gets premiums. So here we have allocated premiums. Okay, now, how do we calculate these allocated premiums? Well, we know that the premium is 10,000, and then we know that the allocation percent is 85%. Okay, so that's going into be purchased for the bid value, but there's a bid offer spread, and we know that the insurer takes that up front. So of this amount, 95% will be invested of this amount. So we can just multiply it again by 0.95. Okay, then you can type that in your calculator, 10,000 times by 0.85 times by 0.95, and that gives you 8075. Okay, so 8075 in this year, and we know that there are level premiums, and this allocation percentage doesn't change, bid offer spread doesn't change, and so I'm going to be getting this 8075 in each year. Okay, so 8075, 8075, and I actually encourage you to write the signs there plus, just in case you forget for a certain one. Then you know if there's no sign, it just means you've forgotten. It doesn't actually mean a plus. So actually distinguish between the positives and the negatives with pluses and minuses. Okay, but obviously I can't fill in these fund at the year start of the next one because there's payments in this first year that I haven't taken account of yet. Okay, so are there any more payments that happen at the beginning of the year? Okay, the reason why I'm asking this because I want to accumulate interest for these payments to the end of the year. So let's go look back here and see. So we know that we get this premiums at the beginning. These unit fund charges are going to be paying at the end of the year. Okay, and it doesn't look like there's anything else going into this unit fund. Okay, so, these unit benefits are also paid, but they're also at the end of the year. Okay, so nothing else looks like it's coming in or going out at the beginning of this year. We can skim through here again and you'll see that there's nothing. Okay, so what I then do is now I can do my interest, and this interest is at 8% per annum. So 0 plus 8075 times by 0.08. 0.08 is my interest, and this is, I'm adding 646. Okay, so now what happens is I've accumulated the interest, and I'm sitting here, it's grown, I have the cost of allocation, and now I need to pay out the benefits and the unit fund charges. Okay, now let's quickly read here again. Annual management charge of 1.25% of the bid value of units, and then it says are deducted at the end of each year before maturity and death benefits are paid. Okay, so that means I'm going to do these management charges first year. Okay, so management charges. Okay, and this is at 1.25%. So if you take those two, you add them together, and you times by 1.25, you should get 109.01. Okay, and this is an outflow from the unit fund. Okay, now we don't take into account these maturity benefits or death benefits in this unit fund. We are actually going to assume in the accumulation of this unit fund that the policyholder might survive until the end. Okay, so I'm not just going to take out the fund value. And the reason why I do this is because this now are all of the cash flows that are going to occur in this year for this unit fund, besides potentially a death benefit. Okay, now I'm not going to actively take into account the death benefit here, because then that'll affect the fund at the start of the next year, and then it'll affect the death benefit there. So I just know that the death benefit is going to be the amount that's going to be contributed to the death benefit is going to be this fund at the end of the year. Okay, so, and I'll explain this a little bit more. So here I'm ending this tabulation, fund at year end, and this is, if you just sum those up, you get 8611.99. Okay, so what I'm saying here is if there's a death benefit in the first year, it's equal to 20,000. This much will be paid out of the unit fund, okay? And then the rest of it will be paid from the non-unit fund. So I don't actually have to tabulate anything. The amount is sitting there. But if I do try and tabulate it in there, I'll be left with 0, and I'll be starting second year with 0. But it doesn't make sense because the policy would have ended, and then I'm not actually doing a profit test for the rest of the years. It doesn't make sense, okay? So you see that this is how I must do it, and that makes sense. All right. Now, the fund at the start of year 2 obviously equals the fund at the end of year 1. Okay. There's no cash flows that happen in between here, no time value of money, no probability, exact same amount. 8611.99. Okay. Then the allocated premium gets added. Then there's interest. Okay. So the interest is on 8611.99 plus this, and then times by 0.08. And what I get there is 1,334.96. Okay, and that's an inflow. Okay, and then I have my management charges. So I take that, and I multiply that by 0.0125. That's 1.25%, and that gives me 225.27, and that's an outflow. Okay, now I can just tabulate all of these, and what it gives me is 17796.68. So the only reason why we're doing this unit fund here is if the whole point of the question is to calculate the profit margin on the contract. Only reason we're doing this unit fund is so that we can get these management charges out. Okay, we're not interested necessarily in this unit fund. We're interested in the profit margin in this question. And so in order to calculate the profit margin, we need the expected profit or loss in each year. We need that profit vector. In order to get that profit vector, we need the management charges. In order to get the management charges, we need to set up this unit fund. Okay, so the question didn't ask us to set up both, but we know that we need to, because we need these management charges. We can't just go calculate them off the top of our head, because you saw that this management charge here came from values that accumulated from previous years. So I actually need to go through this whole process of tabulating in order to get my management charges in all of the years. Okay, so there you go. That's my fund at the end of year 2. And then this Y doesn't look very good. Let's just do that. Okay, then that's going to be the 17796.68 is my fund at the start of year 3. Okay, then I add that allocated premium that comes in at the beginning of the year. Then I sum those two together, get my interest out. Now it should be becoming repetitive to us, a little bit boring now. So it's 2069.73. That's my interest in the year. So now this is all accumulated to the end of the year. And then I must take out this management charge. The management charge is 349.27. That's 1.25% of the sum of those three. And then now add up all of those and you get 27592.14. Okay, now before I go ahead and calculate the non-unit fund, I just wanted to give you a quick hint here. So in tabulating all of these, you want them to be accurate as possible, and you want to do it as quickly as possible so you can get all the marks. Okay, now how do you do it as accurately as possible? When you're going through this process, keep the numbers in your calculator. Okay, that means that you don't have to round them. So yes, I'm rounding here when I'm writing it on the page, but I'm actually keeping it in my calculator so I can have the exact numbers. Okay, and then another thing is if you want to now go and calculate this final value and you've just calculated this, which is 8% of, or rather you've just calculated these management charges, which is 1.25% of all of that, then what do you know? Okay, if that's 1.25%, you can go back in your calculator to the previous number and then you can just subtract answer. Okay, that's one way you could do it. Or if you know that that's 1.25%, then this here must come to the 98.75%. Okay, now don't get too complicated with it because you might mess it up, but I'm just trying to illustrate to you that there are quick ways to calculate instead of adding them all up every time and then you're thinking, oh damn, I forgot to store that value and now I don't know what to do, must I go back calculate? You don't have to, it becomes complicated. So try keep values in your calculator and try to be quick with it, which comes with practice. Okay, so before I go on to calculate this non-unit fund, I just want to show something to you. So from the perspective of the policyholder. So in year 1, the potential here is that the policyholder has paid in 10,000, okay? And if the policyholder dies in year 1, then they get out 20,000. Okay, that's a good deal for the policyholder because there's no way he's going to get a 100% return on any other asset, okay, in that first year. So if he doesn't take out insurance and he happens to die, he might be left with 10,100 or 10,000 or 11,000, say. But he's not going to end up with 20,000. So it's a good deal in this first year. Good cover there if he dies. Now in the second year, if the policyholder dies, he's paid in 20,000 so far, which would have accumulated otherwise if he kept it by himself to maybe, let's say, 22,500 optimistically, something like that. And then the fund, okay, what the fund at year end doesn't matter because he's going to get paid out the greater of that, or 20,000. So he gets paid out 20,000. Okay, so he gets paid out 20,000, but he otherwise would have been sitting with something a little bit greater than 20,000 because he would have accumulated interest. Okay, so that's not a good deal either. So for the policyholder, okay, so this was a good deal, we decided, but this here would have been a bad deal for the policyholder if he dies. But now in this third year, let's see what happens, okay? So in the third year, the policyholder might die and he might survive. Okay, so if the policyholder dies, then he's paid in 30,000 in premiums, which would have accumulated if he had have kept them instead of paying them in here. To who knows what, let's just guess like round about 35,000 would have accumulated. That's how much he would be sitting with now. But now he gets paid out the greater of the fund value and the bid value of units. He gets paid out 27,000, which is less than the total amount that he paid in. Okay, so if he dies in year 3, then it was a bad deal for the policyholder. Okay, but if he lives in year 3, then he will get out 115% of the bid value of the units. So you'll get out that times by 1.15. And that times by 1.15 gives him a roundabout a 5% return on his investments, which we'll say then is a good deal. He maybe have been able to get that by himself, so it's an okay deal, we'll rather say. It's a good deal, bad deal, okay deal, depending on what his investments would have been otherwise. Okay, so that's not directly pertinent to this question, but I think it's a good thing to understand. All right, so that's the unit fund setup. Now let's calculate let's tabulate this non-unit fund now. Okay, so we have these management charges. That was the important line there. So here, non-unit fund. Okay, so here's the non-unit fund. I'm going to tabulate this. Year 1 again, there's year 2, and there's year 3. Okay, so let's go look back at our diagram. Non-unit fund, where are the inflows? Okay, so at the beginning of the year, I'm getting these unallocated premiums and I'm getting this bid offer spread. Okay, so now you can go and calculate the 10,000 times by 0.15, and that's that. And then you can add the 10,000 times by 0.85 times by 0.05 and add them together and get there. But do you not see that the premiums essentially get split into everything that goes here and everything that goes here? So everything that goes here is not everything that goes here. So it's the difference between the income, 10,000, and what actually gets invested here. So instead of going in and adding all that up and calculating in a complicated way, I'm just going to go 10,000 minus 8075, and that's the amount that goes into my non-unit fund. So what is that? It's 1925. Okay, that's an inflow there. And what is this? This is my unallocated premium. Okay, and then I get that in all of the years. So plus 1925 plus 1925. Okay. All right, now there are expenses. Okay, so we go back, we look here. There's unallocated premiums that come in here, this bid offer spread that comes, and we've taken account of both of those. What other cash flows happen at the beginning of the year so that I can calculate that interest here that's going to grow my non-unit fund? What other things happen at the beginning? These non-unit benefits, okay, those are at the end of the year. These management charges, end of the year. But these company expenses and profit, those happen at the beginning of the year. See here, initial expenses 600, and then my renewal 100 at the start of each of the second and third policy years. So here then I have expenses, and here it's minus 600, here minus 100, and here minus 100. Okay, now I do my interest. And what did we say our interest percent was on the non-unit fund? 4% per annum. Okay, so don't use that 8% again. We're using a different thing here. It's the non-unit fund's interest. Different investments, different interest. Interest at 4%, so that minus that times by 0.04. What does that give us? Plus 53. This, what will that give us? Plus 73. And this should be the same as this year because the cash flows were the same. So plus 73. Okay. But in this first year here, it was plus 53 because it got eroded by a greater expense, okay, than these other 2 years. Okay, that makes sense. So we're sitting here now at the end of the year in terms of time value of money. We've taken into account all the cash flows, premiums, expenses, interest. Now what do we take into account? Well, now these management charges need to be paid out before the death benefits and maturity benefits. Okay, so then here I'm going to write here my management charges. And by the way, it's okay for you to go ahead and do abbreviations like I'm doing here. And then, okay, so by the way, now this 109.01, you might think that, oh, I don't have the rest of these decimals anymore. It's not a big deal. It's a big deal that you follow through in this first one with the correct numbers, but it's not such a big deal here. From what I've seen in memos, it's not generally expected that you have exact amounts to decimals in here, and it tends to all become a little bit arbitrary later on in the question. But if you having a rounding error early in the question and then you go through a lot of cash flows, it might amplify when you multiply things. But generally it's not a big deal later on in the question in this non-unit fund where it would have been ridiculous for you to try and like store everything. But if you can, if you know how to, then I'd always recommend, and if you have the time for it, then I'd recommend that you actually go store the values. So it does add a little bit of a time cost to the question, but if you can do it, then go ahead and do it. I would recommend. Okay, so let's say you've stored that value. You're going to keep it, you've kept it in your calculator. You might have written A there, you've stored it in A in your calculator, that's fine. Okay, so try store your values if you can. The moral of the story is to be as accurate as you can, but also try finish this question and don't get bogged down in the accuracy so that you don't get all the later marks, because there's still marks, a lot of marks on the table here. Essentially all we've done is we've got these management charges and we've started setting up the non-unit fund. Okay, there's going to be a few marks elsewhere for all that we've done here, like the unallocated premium, but we don't want to be faffing on the early part of the question and not get to the zeroization, not get to the profit margin, not get to net present value, all these other things. Okay, we need to get there as well, not get to the death benefit and maturity benefit calculations, because all these other things also carry a lot of marks. Okay, so management charges, we add that exact same, but in the reverse. It comes out the unit fund and into the non-unit fund. So out there, into here, plus 349.27. Okay, then what happens now? So let's go back, look at our diagram. We were thinking about this. We don't actually draw this on our page. We have this in our head, we understand it, and we're thinking about it. Okay, so premiums, yeah, we've taken account of those. The thing's grown, we've paid out our expenses, we've now got these management charges. What else could happen to this non-unit fund? Non-unit benefits could be paid to the policyholder. Okay, so I go back and I look now. Okay, so what are my benefits? Well, I have death benefits and maturity benefits. Why? Because it's an endowment. It's an endowment assurance. So here, my expected death benefit. So you might like struggle to write something here because you're thinking, oh, but it's my expected death benefit paid from the non-unit fund. It's not actually my full expected death benefit because the death benefit is going to be 20,000 or the bid value of the unit. So isn't it a bit weird to write it? Yes, it is a bit weird, but it's just so that they know what this line is meaning. Okay, we're not accountants. We're not trying to get exact names correct here. We want to get these values. Essentially, this is our working out. We're trying to get to that profit margin. Okay, we're trying to get to this profit margin over here. It's not that important exactly what your names are, but at least make it clear what it's meant to relate to. Okay, so expected death benefit. All right, now remember the question said, let's refresh our memory. On the death of the policyholder during the term of the policy, there's a benefit payable at the end of year of death of 20,000 or the bid value of the units allocated to the policy if greater. So 20,000, so the maximum of 20,000 and the bid value of the units. Okay, the bid value of the units is 8,611 in this first year, but he's going to get paid out 20,000. So I need to chip in from this non-unit fund. How much do I need to chip in? Okay, so I need this 20,000. I need to chip in this difference, 8611.99. But remember, it's not certain that this policyholder will die. This is an expected death benefit, and it's the expected death benefit per policy that was in force at the beginning of the year. So this is multiplied by Q62, because remember I have ultimate mortality, and this is a death benefit, and my policyholder is aged 62 exact, okay, at the start of this contract. So I have this times by Q62. So in other words, I'm going to have to pay in this difference with probability Q62. So my expected payout is the product of all of those, and it so happens to be 115.61. Okay, you go get that from your table. I'm not going to show you how to get that from your table. So this is a outflow from our non-unit fund because we have to chip in for this death benefit. Okay, fine. Next year, what happens? Well, the fund is sitting at 17,800. Okay, the death benefit is 20,000. Okay, so if he's sitting at 17,800 and I'm paying 20,000, then I have to pay in that difference. So I'll pay him all of these units, but then I must also pay in this extra amount. So what I do, I take the 20,000, exactly what it is in the last year, 20,000 minus 17,796.68, and I multiply this here by Q63. Okay, Q63. Why? Because now at the start of year 2, he's aged 63, not 62 anymore. He's aged by a year. And then also, I'm not doing Q62. I'm not surviving him, making him survive to here and then counting for the death. It's just the death. Why? It's because the profit in this year, remember my profit vector is that I'm eventually going to lead to after all these calculations. My profit vector is per policy in force at the start of that year, not at the start of the contract. That's my profit signature. I'm not going to jump the gun here because all of these things are also in terms of the policyholders in force at the start of that year. How do I know? Well, because not all of them are going to be paying this 100. It's only the ones that renew. Not all of them I would have received this unallocated premium for. It's only the ones that renew. Okay, so all of these are for the policies that are in force at the start of year 2. So times by Q63. There's no survival from 62 to 63 here. Okay, so this equals to 24.99. That's an outflow. Okay. Now, in this last year, okay, so 20,000 gets paid to him if he dies. Okay, so if he dies in this last year, he'll get 20,000 or he'll get the greater of the unit fund value. The unit fund value is sitting at 27,000. It's more than 20,000. So I don't actually have to pay in anything in this third year if he dies. So here, my expected death benefit cost, in fact, let's actually write that here. That's a better way to say it. Expected death benefit cost, that's a cost to us that we must pay in for this expected death benefit. It's 0 in this third year. Okay. Now, what else? What are the benefits here? Maturity benefits. Okay, so expected maturity benefit cost. That's a bit better. Let's write that cost there. I like that. Okay, so now in the first year, what's the maturity benefit going to be? 0, because why? It hasn't matured. Second year, 0. Okay. Third year, there's going to be a maturity benefit. What's the maturity benefit? 115% of the bid value of the units. Okay. The bid value of the units here is 27,592.14. So how do I get this expected maturity benefit? Well, I take this 27,952.14 and I multiply that by the 15% because I only have to pay in the extra. I'm going to pay him this much and then I'm going to pay him the extra 15%, but that extra 15% can't come from here. Why? Because there's no money in there. So I have to pay the 15% out of my non-unit fund, out of my insurer's pocket. Okay, so there's the 15%. And then I have to take into account, just as it did for death benefits, that he survived to the end of that year. Sorry, that he died in that year, and then he got a payment. Here, I'm only going to be paying out this expected maturity benefit if the policyholder has survived. So I need to take into account that probability. So times by, now I'm going to say something about this as well. So this is, how old is he? So he was age 62 at the start. He's aged by 2 years. He's now age 64. So my expected maturity benefit is this times by P64, survival. Okay, and that looks like a 69, let's say 64. Okay, there. Now, multiply that out and it's minus 4086.19. Now, if you go and look at the memo for this, okay, by the way, yeah, I haven't said, this question comes from the subject CT5 from the IFoA exams, September 2005, and then it comes from, yeah, the September one, okay, so not the beginning of the year one, the September one, okay, and it's question 11. Now, if you go look at that, this expected maturity benefit that the memo has is wrong, okay, it's wrong. Now, just because it's a memo doesn't mean it's right, it's wrong. I'm telling you now it's wrong, and I'll explain it to you so you can actually believe me and not just take my word for it. Now, their expected maturity benefit is 4138.821. Okay, so what they did was they didn't multiply by the probability. So the probability decreased it from this to this. Okay, they didn't multiply by that probability. That's wrong. You have to multiply by the probability because it's an expected maturity benefit. Now, it doesn't ruin the rest of the question because they went and course corrected later doing the provision calculation. So I'm going to explain how they did that when I get to it, just so that you can be satisfied that what I'm doing is the correct way. Okay, but take my word for it, the way I'm doing it here is correct. The memo is wrong. Okay. Now, we need this profit. Okay, so here, those are all the cash flows. Let's be satisfied that those are actually all the cash flows. So there's allocated premiums taken care of, bid offer spread taken care of, management charges taken care of, I've grown everything, the interest taken care of, yeah, the expenses, yes, okay, the renewal and all that, yeah, I've taken care of all of that. My non-unit benefits, the difference between what I should pay from my unit fund and what my unit fund is going to pay, okay, fine, I've taken care of that. Everything's taken care of. You can go and skim through this again, this text, body of text, and you'll see that I've taken care of everything. Okay, so here we can now tabulate this and calculate the expected profit or loss in each year. So the expected profit in each year. So this expected profit, you just sum all of those up. First year it happens to be 1371.85. Second year it happens to be 2098.28. And in this third year it happens to be minus 1838.92. And if you are the memo, then you would have written 1891.55, okay, which would have been wrong. But anyway, that's what you would have written. Now we need to zeroize. Okay, so we need to zeroize so we can calculate our revised profit vector. So this now is that non-unit cash flow at each point in time that I was talking, that net non-unit cash flow that I was talking about in my previous video. Okay, now I need to zeroize all of these. So here I'm setting up, let's actually do this in a new color. So this is different now. So this is non-unit fund, let's say reserve. Okay, and now, okay, where must I start this process of zeroization? well, this first year is positive, I don't need to reserve. In fact, I wouldn't reserve in the first year anyway. Okay, so fine. Okay, because this can be a negative one. It's just that all the rest must not be negative. This is what I'm talking about when I say self-supporting the policies. Okay, then here, self-supporting, I've explained in previous videos, just watch that, but quickly it means that there must be one negative cash flow, and that must be at the start of the contract in that first year. Okay, if there are to be any negatives, that could also be positive. But if there are to be any negative cash flow years, that must be the first one. Okay, then year 2, that's a profit. Not reserving in year 1 for year 2, it's a profit, it's fine. Now, year 3, okay, there's a problem. This negative, I have to reserve for. Okay, so how am I going to do that? Well, I need to add the same amount, but I need to add that at the start of the year, okay, because I'm going to be reserved from the start of the year. But this is, my non-unit cash flow is written, and I need my profit vector in a particular year to be written in terms of the time value of money at the end of the year, but in terms of the number of policies in force at the beginning of the year. Okay, so 1838.92 at the end of the year is what must be added. Okay, so then all of that will come to my revised profit, and this revised profit in this year will be 0. Okay, because sum those two up, you get 0. Okay, no coincidence. Now, expected profit here, I've got to take into account this non-unit reserve in year 2 for this amount that came here. But now the difference is that this is at the end of year 3 in terms of the time value of money, and it's at the beginning of year 3 or at the end of year 2 in terms of the number of policies in force. But here I need it to be at the end of year 2 in terms of time value of money, and I need it to be at the beginning of year 2 in terms of number of policies in force. So how do I do that? Well, I've got to discount this by my non-unit fund reserve amount. My non-unit fund provision basis is 4% per annum. So I've got to take this 1838.92 and I multiply that by 1.04 to the negative 1. I discount it by a year. Now it's sitting at the right point in time value of money, but not in terms of number of policies in force, because it must be a number of policies in force at the beginning of year 2, not beginning of year 3. Okay, how do I do that? Well, that means that I have to take into account that probability here. So how do I go ahead and do that? Well, I have to, oh yes, and I must also explain why the memo is wrong, what the memo did to come to the correct answer. Okay, so the amount that I'm going to have to subtract off here must be the policies that survived from the beginning of year 2 until the end of year 2. Okay, so then I must multiply this by P63, because they would have aged for a year to become age 63 at the beginning of year 2, and then I must survive a year in order for this reserve to be taken into account for this one, to be set up in year 3. Okay, fine. So this all comes to, if you type that in your calculator, so this here comes to 1768.192308, and then you multiply it by this probability and it becomes 1748.13, and then this is subtracting from this year, because you're subtracting it from this year's profit to get this year's thing. And I must also explain the difference in the memo. Okay, now just quickly, while it's convenient, take this and you subtract this new cash flow off that's occurring in this year because you're setting up reserves, and what do you get? You get the revised profit of 350.15. Now, the memo course corrected and ends up with this correct value here. But the reason how the memo course corrected is because you'll note in getting this value, I took this value, I discounted it by a year, okay, which was the negative of that. I just discounted it by a year and I multiplied by probability. Fine, okay, I get that. What the memo did was they took this value And then remember this here, they had instead like 4,100 or something. Then what they did was they added it back, and then they subtracted off the correct amount. And then they did what I did, discounted and then times by probability to get this correct amount over here. So the memo reversed its mistake, okay, later on, in order to reconcile with the way that I've done it, which is the correct way. Okay, so that should provide you with some level of comfort if you were unsure about whether you should believe me in saying the memo is wrong. That should provide you some comfort the memo is actually wrong, because it went and reversed its mistake later. Okay, so there you go. And now let's think about it. Do I need to set up a unit fund, non-unit fund reserve in year one? Well, I would only have to do that if my revised profit here became negative after I set up this non-unit fund reserve at the end of year 2 for year 3. Well, did it become negative? Did my profit become negative yet? No, it didn't. I didn't make a loss. It's positive here. So 0 there. I'm not setting up a reserve. What's this? 1371.85. So there you go. This is my revised profit vector. Okay. Now, let's actually write there, revised profit vector. Okay, that's a profit vector. Now, I've done all the hard yards. Now I need to go calculate my profit margin. Okay, let's use green here. Profit margin. This is equal to my net present value over my expected present value of my premiums. And in fact, if you want to try and get some more marks, we'd go here and we'd actually try and write this profit signature. So what's the profit signature? The profit signature is the profit in each year at the end of each year, but per policy in force at the beginning of the contract. So I take this profit vector in this year is the profit at the end of the year, but per policy in force at the beginning of the year. The beginning of the year happens to coincide with the beginning of the contract, and so my profit signature in this year is 1371.85. Okay. Now, the memo doesn't actually go ahead and calculate profit signature, but it's something that I'd recommend you do because you can get some extra marks if you've made a mistake somewhere. Okay, then this 350 is per policy in force at the beginning of year 2. So I have to take into account the number of policies that survived from the beginning of year 1 to year 2 in order to calculate the profit signature for year 2. So what that is, that's PS2, by the way. This here is PS1. So PS2 over here is going to be this 350 times by P62. So you go do that. You'll get a number out here. I don't actually have it calculated, but you get a number there. And I don't want to go look at my table. So anyways, you get a number there. And then this 0 here, well, multiplied by any probability, it's not changing. It's still going to be 0. So that stays 0 there. Okay, now profit margin is this profit signature, but discounted. So I take this amount here, so that the numerator of my profit margin, my net present value. This here is the amount at the end of year 1 in terms of the time value of money. So I take 1371.85 and I multiply it by V at my risk discount rate now. We've used multiple interest rates here, this 8%, this 4%, and actually this 4% as well, which could have been different, but they were kind. So if you forgot that this existed, you would have been fine. But anyways, there's 3 different interest rates we've used so far. Now there's 15% to discount our profits to get our net present value. So discount that by a year, discount that by 2 years, discount that by 3 years. Well, it doesn't matter. Okay, you add them all up, you get your net present value. Then your net present value happens to be equal to 1455, and then your expected present value of your premiums. So this here, it doesn't matter that you're doing allocated premiums, unallocated premiums, all this stuff. This is just of the premiums, okay? So that absolute amount that got paid in, which was 10,000. So in each year it was 10,000. So this expected present value of the premiums is going to be 10,000 into 1, because 1 in the first year, it pays at the start, so no time value of money, no probability, plus V at 15%, that's my discount factor for 1 year, plus P62. So this is the second premium, taking account of the second premium that happens at the beginning of year 2, end of year 1. So discount by year take into account the fact that the policyholder can survive until the beginning of the year, beginning of the second year, and then plus V2 15% risk discount rate again, and then P62.2 because he must survive 2 years in order to pay this premium. So the expected present value of the premiums is going to be equal to that. And then when you calculate all of that, it gives you this final answer for your profit margin of 5.59%. And that's the question done. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that video. I hope it wasn't too long, and I hope it cleared things up and made this section a little bit more approachable for you. Anyways, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.